Well, today we're going to do a little project here. We're going to take out all the LEDs that are in the Concor MP-54 car, and we're going to replace them with warm white LEDs because there's nothing worse than these god-awful amber LEDs they've got in the car. So I've taken the liberty to already take the board out of the car, and if you can see inside, I've also put people in there. So I've populated the car. So we'll set that aside. And this is the board that we're going to be working on. Now, this one has already been done. So I'll give you a little close-up here of what we're looking at, okay? This is the LED for the headlight, and there's one on each end of the car. And it's going to be kind of tough to see, but basically these LEDs are a little bit bigger than the original ones that Concor used. And I can provide the actual part number from DigiKey for these after I'm done the process of replacing. And this is what the bottom looks like. Now, this is the first one I did, so the LEDs are not exactly square and perpendicular, if you will, with the card. But it was a learning curve, so the next one should be a little easier. It takes approximately 20 minutes to replace all 7 LEDs. And when you take the LEDs off, don't worry about them because there's no way to survive these things. They will be destroyed the minute you put heat on them. So you pretty much are going to forfeit those things no matter what. But I'll give you an idea what they look like once you put the white LEDs in, and they're so much nicer. One of the other things that you have to do, and we're almost starting at the end of the tutorial versus the beginning of the tutorial, but if you look at the very end of the LED here, on one side of the LED facing the front of the car, I've painted the side of the LED black. Now the reason for that is there's a little foam, squangy kind of piece of foam glued to the circuit board where the original one was. The only way to get the LED out is to take that off, and once you do, you destroy it. The reason that was there is to keep any light from shining between the crack of the roof and the front of the car. So a way to get around that is to paint the side of the LED black, which you have to do to both ends. It's kind of hard to see there, but you notice that the side of the LED is painted black. So what I'm going to do is assemble this car that's finished, and I'll give you a shot of what it looks like with the white LEDs in it, and you'll see how much nicer they look comparatively to the old LEDs, the amber LEDs that Concor put in it from the factory. Okay, now with the car back on the track and fully assembled, you can clearly see that the headlight is much brighter. The car in itself looks much better. Let me see if I can get a good shot of the side of it. You can see the interior looks a lot nicer. There is not that god-awful amber glow that is prevalent in all the Concor cars when they come from the factory. And it's a nice warm white. Now, because the LEDs are just a little bit bigger, they're also just a little bit brighter. So if you want to tone them down even further, just a little dab of an acrylic warm white color or cream white paint on the LEDs themselves will just tone them down just a little bit more. But other than that, I think it makes a vast improvement on how good the car looks. And as far as the LEDs go, you can see how much brighter that headlight is now. It looks more realistic. Now, because this car is not powered, I'll be turning the headlights off, and later on I will more than likely be putting in stationary decoders so that I can select which headlight is on when I'm running the car in a consist. So if I reverse the direction, which these could be running from either end, then the proper headlight will be on at the end of the car that's actually going in the direction of travel. So more fun stuff. Now on this one, this is the mail baggage car, one of the more rare cars. This is actually the one I have that's powered. So when we pull this one apart, we're going to have to take off the, 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 we wire that would normally go to the pickup for the overhead wire. And of course, this is going to be a little bit more difficult because it has a decoder in it. It also has a hole for where the speaker would go and a place to mount the speaker with a baffle right to the roof. What's interesting is if you go to the website for Concor, they indicate that the proper sound system for this is, I think it's a TCS sound decoder. I'd have to double check, but they indicate that it is only available through them because they have the rights to the recording that's the actual recording for this unit. But when you get the kit to put the sound in it, it comes with a big old bulky round speaker. And if you look at the video on how to put it in, it totally ruins the interior. And nothing mounts in the car the way the car was originally designed. So it's a little disconcerting to think that you would have to go that route, especially for the price of the decoder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little disassembly here and then get back to the video on this, because taking this thing apart, it just doesn't really take too much. You just kind of wedge it up because there's these nice little pins that fit in the bottom of the card, and then everything comes up just like this. There's the decoder right there. Now, this is obviously not a sound decoder, so for purposes of making it easier to do, I'm just going to pop that decoder out, set it off to the side. The other thing I'm going to do is pull the wires for the motor out with these little shoes that hold them in. You want to be really careful not to lose these little things, because they're very hard to find if they hit the floor. And needless to say, it doesn't make for a good time trying to find them. In this particular car, since it is the powered unit, I don't know whether you can see it here, but I put in an engineer and I put in some folks working in the baggage department or the mail department sorting mail. Because this car is, the floor is technically way too high, you actually have to cut the legs off the people that you put in here to get them down to a realistic height so that they fit properly, which is a shame, but in order to get everything in there, that's the way you got to do it. So, as I said before, there's some black foam here right on the edge, which is there to basically block the light from seeping through the hole underneath where the roof snaps in place, because realistically, this just basically, the LED reflects up directly, and then it's directly underneath this piece of square clear plastic, which is kind of a refractor, if you will, that refracts up and then as a 90-degree shoots out. Now, if it was my choice, and I still might do this, I might drill a hole in this little square piece here, because there's no way to get it out without probably ruining the model. So I would drill a hole in that so that I could put a 1.5 millimeter LED in place of this one I'm going to put in here now. What that would do is make that headlight even brighter yet. But since I did one using this refractive method, and it really looks pretty good, I'm going to leave it go at that, because that way the card is still easily removed. Not that it wouldn't be with the 1.5 millimeter LED in there, because you could sit that literally flat on the board. And I think you could probably, yeah, you could. You could get away with drilling 2 small holes to put the circuit board mounted style, drop it directly in there. The only problem would be is trying to solder it to the trace, because the traces on this board are on the top, not the bottom. So, you know, as I said, the more I think about it, the more, I should say, the less feasible it is, because the trace is on the wrong side of the card. Now, if they had put the trace on the bottom, and obviously it wouldn't have worked with the surface mount LED, then you could have put the circuit board mounted style 1.5 millimeter in there, and it would have been nice and bright. It would have looked a lot better. You know, but then again, we as modelers have a tendency to redesign a lot of things that the people at the factory design, and Sometimes it's due to necessity. Sometimes it's due to that our Monday morning quarterbacking actually can do it better after the fact, because we see what happens as the users, and the people in the factory are doing it as a, hey, how can we make money? And they're really not looking at what's practical for us, the modeler. So, then again, that's the beauty of this hobby, is to be able to enjoy undoing what everybody else does and making it better. You know, you got to love that kind of thing, because what's the fun of the hobby if all you're doing is running something around a circle? It's modifying everything to make it what it wasn't originally designed to be, and it ends up being better in the end. Now, I'm going to use these wonderful little extra hands, because you got to have something to hold this card when you go to solder or unsolder these LEDs. Soldering them, you can pretty much leave it flat on your workspace, but when you unsolder them, you need to have something to hold it. Now, I'm using a micro soldering iron. This is a little 15-watt Antex soldering iron, which I got from a company called Engineering, and now that's capital N, Engineering. So it's not the word engineering, it's actually a fancy way to make up that word. But the company sells micro miniature LEDs, little devices like this one, so that you can actually hold micro miniature LEDs and solder micro miniature wires that are no bigger than a human hair, to make really nifty little HO scale gooseneck lamps, to which, if you don't have a good set of glasses and a lot of patience, I wouldn't recommend doing it. But the results are great. They really are. I love the way they turn out. But you really have to have a lot of patience. So the first thing I'm going to do, I don't know whether I can actually... Problem with a workbench is typically it has way too much stuff on it. So I'm going to see if I can relocate this camera so that you can see more of what I'm doing here. Let's see. Yeah, this might work. But anyway, so what I'm going to do is grab the LED with the tweezers. Now this is one of the headlight LEDs. All right, and then lay the soldering iron against the one side of the LED. Now in doing that, it's already completely destroyed the LED. It's fallen completely apart. And unfortunately, this is not going to be easy, because I'm only heating one side. But what the LED has done, it's actually totally, the plastic on the top of the LED is totally disintegrated, and now the entire board, or the LED itself, is exposed. And this is the part that's sitting on top of the circuit board soldered to the pad. And this is not going to make it easy for me. I can see that already. So stand by, folks. Okay, basically what I had to do, now, let me move this light up a little bit. The pad is now clean. But what I had to do is I had to get a pair of pliers like this, cutters, and I had to get in there and actually cut the LED away, break the Bakelite back on it, so that the only thing that was exposed is the two pads. Then go in with the soldering iron and clean off the pads completely and get all the garbage off of it, so it exposes the pads like it is now. Now what I'll end up doing with a tiny bit of solder is just put a little bit of solder on those two pads to freshen up the solder with fresh. And then I'll move on to removing the rest of the LEDs. That way, you end up having a clean removal of the LED. The pad's nice and clean. The other thing you want to do is use a large magnifying light like this. Get it down close to the pad so you can see it, and make sure that you scrape the area between the pads to make sure none of the solder bridged the gap. You also want to inspect the pad to make sure that the copper cladding has not come loose and you haven't destroyed the card. The card's pretty tough, but you want to make sure that you take these steps, because putting it back is a lot easier than taking it off. The other thing too is that if you notice here, there's a resistor, and I think I got to turn this a little bit more so you can see it. Pull this light up a little bit. There you go. Get rid of the glare. Okay, there's a resistor on this board is right here. Okay, and then across each one of these LEDs is this little brown thingy that looks like a surface mount resistor. What that is a capacitor. That capacitor charges up and basically holds some electricity to fire that LED should you have a loose connection on the wheels when it connects to the track, to cut down on the flicker on the LEDs when the car is moving. On this circuit board, of course, this is the one that accepts the actual decoder. You also have rectifiers for usage when you're using a straight DC connection, and you also have subsequent capacitors on here, and there's a regulator board that regulates the LEDs. It's pretty nice the way it's laid out. Interestingly enough, there's also two connections here on this particular one for the speaker. So if you look at the decoder, it's actually a 10-pin decoder, not an 8-pin decoder. The last two pins on this socket, which are not used with a standard decoder, are actually connections to these speaker connections here on the side. So it seems to me that when they designed this, they designed it so you could use a 10-pin connector, that you could circuit mount the wires to the speaker and semi-permanently mount them inside the car with a perfectly mounted speaker, about a 1/2 inch by 1.5 inch speaker, or 1/2 inch by inch speaker, and everything would be perfectly self-contained. And it looks like they abandoned that idea later on, which is a shame, because it was a good idea that they apparently didn't follow through with. Now, that's what I'm finding on this particular car, and since it's a rather rare car, I haven't seen too many of them out there. I just got lucky to find this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and remove all the old LEDs, because it takes too long to do that in this video, and we'll come back and I'll show you how to solder one or two of them in, and then we'll show you the finished product again on this car, which will have a decoder in it, so I can actually show you turning on and off the headlights and seeing how nice they look. Okay, I found a much quicker way to do this. Like I said, and the necessity of inventions here depends on the situation, but since we're not going to salvage these LEDs, it's easier to take a flat edge cutter like this and literally just cut the LEDs right off, destroy them. Make sure you cut it down to the circuit board, break the Bakelite or the back portion of the LED. Make sure you get it where you can see the green through the two pads. Then you can take your soldering iron and just heat up the pads and clean the pads up. It's much quicker, it's much more thorough. You can't salvage the LEDs anyway, so there's no point. And it takes a lot less time. Okay, now that I've cleaned off the pads and gotten all the LED gook off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this microfine solder, also from engineering, and all I'm going to do is just put a little dab of solder on these pads and try to freshen them up a little bit. Try to keep the solder a nice flat ball on the pad. Don't let it peak, because you got to try to get these LEDs in there, and you want to get them to sit flat, and it's not always possible. You just want to put a little bit on there to refresh it. That way the new LED will stick, because you will not need much heat at all. In fact, you'll be using the tweezers to hold down the LED while you apply just a tiny little bit of heat to one side of the LED, and then once you have that side set, then you'll do the same thing to the other side, making sure you constantly blow on the LED, because you want to keep the temperature down. If you get too much heat on the LED, it will fry the LED. Okay, when I buy these LEDs, they come in a strip like this. This is called a tape strip. They also are listed on DigiKey as a reel, which means this is actually coiled into a reel. And these are used for the machines that actually put the component right onto the card. The nice thing about them is it's a nice container to hold them and keep them in a sealed airtight, well, not exactly airtight, but it's in a nice sealed container. Now in this case we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 2 on the other side. There's a total of 8 LEDs on these. I think I might have said 7 before. So we're just going to peel back this tab and let 6 of them drop out, because we're going to do the inside of the car first. Now, the other thing you have to be very careful with is the LEDs are all marked differently depending on the manufacturer. And I'm not going to be able to show you this, but this is what the LED looks like. See if I can get it in here somewhat close on my tweezers. And on one side of the LED, instead of it being square cornered, one side has a little notch cut out. On these LEDs, that is the plus side. And you really got to be careful, because if you just noticed, I just dropped it. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Here it is. All right. Now, I don't know whether it's possible for me to get that camera in here, but I'm going to try it. I basically just put the 2 LEDs side by side. So if you look very closely there, you can actually see the difference in size. The one with the little green arrow on it is pointing towards which side is the negative. The other LED is the larger of the 2 LEDs, and that's in a different style casing, just a little bit bigger. But these LEDs come even smaller than that. They get to a point where they're so small you have to be somebody in the land of the giants to be able to actually work with them, because they're that small. And that's why I get them directly from China with the wires already applied and connected to them, because they're so much easier to work with that way. Now, let me just take a look-see. With my giant magnifying glass here. And keep in mind, as I'm doing this, I'm still using, yeah, there it is, okay. I'm still using the giant magnifying glass to see this thing, and I'm wearing glasses. So the older you get, the harder this is. So I'm going to put the LED on the pad. Now this is bridging the 2 pads. Okay. And remember when I said the pads are not level, so the LED is kind of tilting to one side. So what we have to do to get this thing to actually solder to the board is we take our soldering iron and this very, very small solder, and we put a tiny little ball of solder on the soldering iron. And now what we want to do, basically what we're doing there is not that we need more solder, it's that we need to make sure that we get a good solid contact with heat, and that it transfers the heat quickly so you can pull the soldering iron off right away. And right now this LED is really fighting me to get in place, but here we go. All right, touch the side of the LED real quick, blow on it. One side is soldered. Now on this one, we're going to just take a little bit more solder, and I'm going to just touch it to the side of the LED real quick. Blow on it again, and it's done. All right, the LED is in place. You can see it in there. It's now where it needs to be. It's fairly square with the hole. It's soldered to the 2 pads, and we're ready to move on to the next one. The more you do this, the quicker this goes, and the easier it becomes. But don't for a minute think that this is something you want to do if you've had a really bad day. I would leave it for a time when you've got the ability to be somewhat composed and have some patience, because it's well worth it when it's done, but it does try your patience. Again, put a little pressure on the LED to hold it still. Touch one side. blow on it. All right, it's solid. It's not going anywhere. A little bit more of the solder. I'm just going to touch it to the side. It'll bridge the gap. Blow on it. Looks good. And on we go. Okay, the LEDs are all in. Everything is complete. And as you can see, that headlight is considerably brighter. The number boards are lit nice and bright. Everything looks the way it should. And the interior doesn't have that stupid orange glow anymore. And it really kind of steps up the quality of the look of the car. A little bit of patience, of course. And a little bit of time, and you can pretty much knock it right out, and it ends up looking really good. All right, and you can see how much nicer it looks. As it goes by. And of course the difference in the headlight when the headlight comes on is like night and day. So there you have it. Those LEDs cost, because I figured that'll be the next question, about $18 for 100 of them. So they're very inexpensive, and they really make this car a real good looking car. And in addition to the fact that it runs great, it'll be a great addition to your railroad. Until the next time.